You're listening to Straight to the Point, Uncut. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of Straight to the Point, Uncut with myself, Kieran Gibbons. You can follow us on Twitter at STTP Uncut. You can like our Facebook page and you can subscribe to us on YouTube. The podcast is also available to download. There are already 4 episodes on the site and on YouTube, ready for download, bit of a mixed bag of subjects. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Doughty. Ben, thanks for coming on the show. I know the subject we're going to be talking about, your fight with alcoholism, is a very personal subject. So no, I appreciate you coming on. And it's not an easy subject for everyone to speak about. Ben, for those who don't know him, is a writer and a personal trainer. A lot of people will know Ben from his involvement in the sport of boxing, which is where I first become aware of Ben. Ben, let's get straight to it. When did you realize that alcohol was a problem in your life?
I realized that it was a problem, and I think sometimes, Kieran, we tend to reject the term alcoholic because it tends to be caked in stigma and shame, and surely not me. There's a line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says nobody likes to think he is bodily or spiritually, emotionally different from his fellows, kind of thing. So I think sometimes if people ask me today what's the difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic, I say nothing. But I think I identified myself as a problem drinker many years before I got sober. You know what I mean? Certainly, I was 29, 30, and I knew I was drinking too much. I was getting, bodily, complaints when the hangovers the hangovers from hell started to kick in. And I know everybody hams up their hangovers, right? And says, "Oh, I'm never drinking again." And oh my God, man, I feel like I got a pneumatic drill in my head. But I really felt, I felt like I could keel over and die sometimes, after partying for a couple of days on end. But the trouble was, at no point did I actually stop drinking. I would complain about the hangovers. I would do funny things, like I would touch my, sides. I'd be like, "Oh, is that my liver?" I even developed this funny mannerism where I'd be checking my pulse to see it wasn't getting too quick, because my dad was an alcoholic who died of a heart attack at, way too young. And I developed all these kind of phobias around it, but I carried on drinking, of course, So I think certainly 29, 30, 31, I suspected, deep down I knew I was an alcoholic then, and I carried on drinking for another 16, 17 years regardless.
Okay, so if we take things back a little bit, when did you first start drinking? Did you start drinking as a youngster, or what age, Ben?
You know what, Kieran? I wasn't particularly quick off the blocks, because I think most people, and certainly a lot of the alcoholics I speak to, they tended to start in the teenage years, the whole kind of Thunderbird smuggled into the school disco or behind the bike sheds kind of scenario. And because I was an amateur boxer, during those years, I wasn't really about that life. I was focused, that's what I wanted to do in my life. I was very kind of obsessed and wrapped up in the boxing training and the lifestyle, bought into the whole thing, read about it all. And when I was a teenager, I didn't think fighters drank. When I grew up, I realized that they do, to varying different, degrees. You get your Ricky Hattons and Arturo Gattis who love to drink, but they would juggle the monastic training with the party lifestyle. But I just figured boxers, like Muhammad Ali, and I thought Sugar Ray Leonard was too, but he turned out to be a drinker and a cocaine user too, didn't he? But so I didn't drink much in my adolescence, to be honest with you, teenage years. You know what? I think there is an axiom that the devil will find work for idle hands, and I think when I stopped boxing, didn't get the A-level results that I perhaps should have got and was expected to get, so I didn't get the university offer that I was banking on, and I was too kind of cool or too proud to sort myself out and find a college placement or something that like a contingency. So I just kind of stopped boxing at 18, 19 initially, and got myself a job in an off license, you know, relevantly enough to this sort of context. And I think that was a problem for me. And I think I went through that stage of adolescence that most people experience at about 15 when I was about 19. So I was kind of, and unfortunately, I kept it going at least into my mid 30s, you know, until I became a parent. I mean, I didn't get sober when I became a parent, but I probably extended that whole kind of playtime period for a very long time. So I think, you know, I mean, I do remember getting drunk at 10 on the boxing club holiday. It wouldn't happen today with child protection and everything, but I was the youngest one in the boxing club at the time. We used to go to this god-awful place called Breen in Somerset. It's near Weston-super-Mare, okay? Don't go there. And we used to go for holiday in this great big, you know, marquee type tent, the whole club sleeping in there. And there were different days, you know, that era, you know, it was just, let's get the youngest one pissed. You know, this is trainers and adults that you've been entrusted to their care that did it. And I'm not, you know, pointing a finger at anybody. I think it was to an extent harmless fun back in that era. But yeah, so I remember getting pissed when I was 10. But no, I didn't really get really into that kind of lifestyle of thinking drinking was great until I got back from the States in 1990 after this kind of ad hoc whistle-stop tour where I'd gone to New York initially with a friend had given me a free ticket, an older acquaintance. And then I'd gone 6 months. Long story short, it's in the first book that I've recently published. For anyone who's interested in the finer points of it. But when I got back from Colorado in 1990, I was very much interested in drinking at that point and drugs as well. But you know, I wanted to try this, that, and the other. But I found I was suddenly drinking to get drunk by the time I was about 20, and not to mention very interested in narcotics and the whole kind of, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll. That hoary old myth, you know. I mean, I was into Guns N' Roses, so I thought Slash was really cool, and Axl Rose was really cool. And Slash said he drank a bottle of Jack Daniels a day, and it didn't look at the time like it was doing him any harm. I do believe today he has a defibrillator in his chest to stop him from dying.
Yeah. So, as a youngster, Ben, were you brought up around alcohol? You mentioned your dad drank a lot.
Well, my dad was an alcoholic, no question. And you know what? He was that classic, almost cartoon push of a button alcoholic. He could literally go from a high-end executive to a park bench drinker in a week, just if he got on a bender. My parents split up when I was 5, so to be honest, I was going back and forth in terms of visits and contact with my dad, and I didn't see a lot of him between the ages of 5 and 10 because he was going through his own trials and tribulations. But my mother and my stepdad, I was brought up in their household, and it was a very liberal kind of, you know, wine was freely available. My mum thought it was quite swish and continental for us to be given moderate amounts of wine, beer or cider at meal times, because she thought her reasoning was the French kids did it and they, you know, there was nothing wrong with them. So, you know, I remember alcohol being around, but I wasn't that fussed about it, to be honest with you, in my teenage years, really. I mean, it was in the house, yeah. I would have a drink at Christmas, whatever. But I was brought up to think that alcohol was very much part and parcel of life, yeah.
And I'm guessing as well, being around boxing, you boxed on shows where people were drinking alcohol in the crowd. You already mentioned boxing's a very macho sport. And I know there's, you mentioned a few fighters there who train very hard and don't drink alcohol. But of course, there is the side of the guys who train hard, but they also play hard as well, and they party hard.
Yeah, you know, and some of those dinner shows in the 1980s, anyone who boxed in that era will tell you, they were quite spicy. You know, there was an atmosphere that wasn't altogether nice or friendly sometimes, you know, because you go to these working men's clubs as a kid, smoky venues, lots of people smoking, because obviously that was completely de rigueur back then, you know. There'd be, you know, cabarets, comedians, racist comedians quite often, which was all part and parcel of that 70s, 80s culture. There'd be strippers on who do certain things with anacondas, pythons and cream and stuff. And, you know, and there'd be gambling, people who bet in and shoving like, you know, a £5 or a £10 note down the back of your singlet when you're a skinny 12-year-old kid. And it was, I mean, in some ways it was quite an education, you know, it seemed exciting. But once again, I think we live in an era now which is far more politically correct. And I don't think they would allow most of it. And I don't think the shows are like that anymore, you know. So, but yeah, you'd see what was interesting when at that age, grown men would be talking to you and you'd see them go downhill because some of the trainers would drink, okay, and do our corners once again. And I'm not blaming any of them. It was different days, but I remember it was normal for a trainer. The trainer we had, you know, the guy who was the competition secretary, certainly in our club, who sometimes used to do the corners, and he'd think nothing of having 6 pints before getting in the corner with you and walking you up the steps, you know. And I know Errol Christie's trainer said the same thing. Tom McGarry, the legend from the Triumph Club at Coventry, he said he used to drink all the time because, and yeah, so you'd see grown men and you'd see them change. The later it got, they get, you know, that kind of sincerity of the alcoholic or the not the alcoholic, but the drunk person, when they start saying, you know, listen to me, and I mean this, son. You mean everything to me. You're like a son I never had, and all that. And I think alcohol must have this kind of power that it makes people so, you know, emotional and poetic. You know what I mean? So I guess maybe it did start a bit of a fascination.
And you mentioned your dad. Did you think your dad had a drink problem as a youngster growing up, as a teenager when you used to visit him?
Oh, yeah, Kieran, it was obvious. It was too comical not to be. I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, I loved him when he drank because it was fun. And to be completely honest with you, he could be quite dour and quite troubled in the downtime of I wouldn't call it sobriety when he wasn't drinking. I would call it abstinence. And I could probably expand upon that a little later. But I think there is a difference between sobriety and the beauty of that lifestyle when you get into recovery and you do certain things like going to the AA meetings, and for some people doing the 12 steps and all the rest of it. I think it's very different to that kind of teeth gritted abstinence where you're like, right, I'm not fucking drinking. But there's a word in the rooms when you're not actually drinking, but you've got all other manner of problems and you haven't really addressed the internal stuff. They call it a dry drunk, if that makes sense. And I think Dad was a dry drunk when he wasn't drinking. So for my sins, I used to love it when he started drinking because it meant we could go out. It meant we could, you know, we could break the rules. We could have fun. You know, going out on a night out with him was always hilarious because he'd always cause trouble. He wasn't a pugnacious or a violent man, but he would cause fights just because he was so opinionated, you know, and acerbic. I mean, think of it. You probably got a feel for my personality over the years on social media, particularly when I was still drinking. Now imagine that times 5. Out and about in the pubs with no, you know, with no social media protection, you know. So he was, you know, it was impossible not to see that he was, you know, had a drink problem, was an alcoholic, because he just, it was. I don't mean he became nasty, but it was like Jekyll and Hyde level of transformation. You know what I mean?
So you didn't necessarily have a bad impression of alcohol at a young age. Then you know your father, by your own admission, was drinking way too much. Yeah,
I used to love it, to be honest with you, because the other thing was he lived in London. And I didn't grow up in London. I grew up in Cotswolds in Gloucestershire, Stroud. So coming from the West Country, you know, until I moved up initially to London when I was 19, I'd always go and visit my dad. And by the age of about 14 or 15, when you can have a few shandies, you know, or go to the pub and maybe have a lager with him, I used to think it was fantastic. And to me, it was like being in an episode of Minder, going up to visit him, because his mates were all, you know, they struck me as the kind of characters I'd seen on the TV screen, a lot of them, you know, compared to the sleepy kind of more village environment that I come from. So I used to love drinking with him. I used to absolutely love it. And I think that is because I couldn't see the bigger picture in terms of his life, you know, and also because I was an alcoholic too, waiting to happen, you know. So it wasn't surprising that I was going to fall into that, because nobody becomes an alcoholic because they hate drinking, do they? Or very seldom have I heard an alcoholic tell me they absolutely hated every aspect of drinking. So, you know, I always enjoyed him drinking, and I actually thought he could be quite boring to an extent when he wasn't drinking and he wasn't in a good place. It wasn't a nice, you know, it wasn't a nice atmosphere.
So, did your dad at times try to stop drinking? Did he try to abstain from drinking? Or was he drinking?
Did. No, he would. He was a binge alcoholic. So what he would do, he could not touch a drop for 6 months. But at what cost, I would say? Because I remember thinking he seemed so miserable half the time. I was like, you might as well have a drink, mate. You know what I mean? Because and don't get me wrong, sometimes he'd be not drinking, he'd be in a good place. It'd be the best part of him, and he'd be running, and because he was a fitness freak some of the time when he wasn't drinking. But he never sorted the emotional stuff out that he had going on, and he never. I mean, I think he must have gone to an AA meeting, because I find it seems implausible he wouldn't have at least tried one, because I know he tried other things like, you know, consultations, counselling, doctors, etc. But he obviously never got into the AA thing. I never spoke to him about it because I didn't. While he was alive, I never knew anything about AA, and I was still on my kind of drinking journey. And I would have left it out of court if you'd have told me I needed to go to AA. So if it was possible to get him back for a day or a week or whatever, I would love to talk to him about recovery and AA and ask him, didn't you go to the meetings and what did you think of them? But no, like I say, he was quite capable of leaving it alone for months, weeks on end, months on end. But a lot of alcoholics will tell you that, in AA, a lot of them will tell you, I could stop, but I could never stay stopped.
You were in America for a number of years after you finished boxing, after your A-levels. You returned from the United States, and you described your lifestyle almost sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And of course, alcohol was involved in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I got back from the States, I was only 20 years old, nearly 21. So, to be honest with you, I was interested in drugs at the time because that seemed all very exciting, and it was new to me. Because when I was out in the States, I'd done obviously I'd smoked weed and whatever, or hash. Hash was the thing a bit more in the 90s. I remember. These days, I mean, I'm not in the kind of drug scene and haven't been for years, I hasten to add, but it seems to be about weed these days. Everybody seems to smoke weed these days, whereas when I was in my early 20s, a lot of people had that kind of hash stuff, that whatever some people used to call it Rocky Black or Red Lead. Remember that? So I'd smoked that before I went to the States, but I hadn't really done anything else. So when I went to the States, I did cocaine, which initially I thought was great, mate, effervescent and, invigorated, etc., all that rubbish. And I tried LSD when I was out there as well. So that seemed like really mind-blowing at the time. Although, to be honest with you, I didn't have a good time on it. It was actually quite harrowing. But I remember thinking, well, I just need to try harder next time, because the Beatles, the Stones, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, all of that nonsense. So when I got back to London, right on the Christmas 1990, so right on the cusp of 91, ecstasy was a big thing. The rave culture had engulfed the UK. And the free party scene and the illegal rave scene, and everybody would go to pick up a convoy on a Saturday night and go to this party, but the location of which was passed on by word of mouth, all the rest of it. So when I got back, I wanted to try ecstasy, and there was other stuff, like people were doing magic mushrooms, people were doing ketamine, that silly horse anesthetic. That what it's like in that kind of hipster scene. When people are younger, they think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And for me, it led further than that as well, with stuff like heroin, in due course, because I was the kind of person who was obviously always going to keep pushing something like that.
So how much alcohol were you drinking at this stage in your early 20s back in London?
I would, not necessarily that much, really, not on the scale that I would eventually drink. I mean, back then it was still about going to the pub and getting out of it. I'd drink 6 or 8 pints or whatever. A lot of the time, but I'm probably not a lot, not anything like what I ended up drinking in my 40s. When I came to eventually to the rock bottom scenario, because the interest in drugs sort of kept it at bay to a degree. Because I remember thinking there was a time when if you had 20 quid to spend, you'd rather get like an E or some speed, amphetamines or something like that. And then you might spend the change on a couple of cans or something. Whereas I remember in my early 20s, the first half of my 20s probably, it wasn't the priority to get. The booze was always there and it was always important, but drugs were more the financial priority that you'd spend your money on. And, a drink could be something you might have afterwards to come down on, you know what I mean? So it was only really when I kicked the drugs into touch that I really concentrated fully on the booze, and too much to my detriment.
What age were you then when you stopped taking drugs and started drinking more?
I was kind of done with them more or less by 29. But by the time I was 29, I kicked like smack, heroin for the second time. Was living in Ladbroke Grove at the time with my girlfriend of that particular period in life, and the idea was we went to Paris because we were going to try and give ourselves a new start, a bit of a European tour. and try and, you know, inject some kind of fun back into the relationship, etc. And all I did, we found this hostel in Paris called the Three Ducks Hostel, which had a wild party reputation. It was the worst place you go to as a kind of couple who were looking to you know, for a kind of fresh start emotionally, whatever. So it was just full of people partying all the time and drinking and craziness. That's when I started really drinking with a vengeance. That's when the terrible hangovers also kicked in. And I was, from that point on, I wasn't really interested in drugs, to be honest with you, after that. And it was all about the booze.
Were you conscious of the fact that you were drinking more alcohol at the time? Or was it just you kept on having another pint, you bought another drink?
Yeah, no, I was conscious of it. I mean, I knew that was putting away too much. I say the hangovers were terrible, but I would just drink through it. And the thing with me as well is I was hanging out with a lot of people who were younger than me, maybe up to 10 years younger than me. You know, if I was 29, they were 19, or maybe let's say 23 tops. So they could handle it a bit better, but I'd be going with them and trying to set the pace, you know. And I knew physically it wasn't agreeing with me, but I just thought, well, you know, you just have to drink through it. You just have to keep going. You know what I mean? So,
and were you drinking every day? Was it an everyday thing, or was it just the weekends?
No, definitely every day at that point in Paris. I remember, because I was busking at the time as well, and I remember I found it pretty much impossible to busk without a few drinks. It was just wasn't needed to get in the mood. You know what I mean? It was like, it wasn't Dutch courage, it was Dutch inspiration. You know, I bought into that whole thing that the booze was oil for the soul. So because I was playing guitar all the time in the hostel, you know, to entertain people, and on the subway trains as well in London, Paris, and New York, I did some of that kind of busking, subway, tube, metro, subway circuit. So yeah, I was drinking every day, to be honest with you. But from 29 onwards, I started drinking every day. If I ever didn't, it'd be one of them things where you get so sick of it physically that you'd be like, all right, that's it, I'm going to have a week off. It would never be a whole week, but it might be 3 days, you know. After 3 days, I find, even on those times when you swore you're never going to drink again, because it's causing you problems, emotional, physical, and spiritual, whatever, I find after 3 days, you start to feel normal, and you start to kid yourself, and you start thinking, oh, I was being a bit melodramatic then. I'm sure a few pints wouldn't hurt, you know.
And what was your choice of drink at this stage of your life? Were you drinking a lager, shots, whiskey?
Yeah, to be honest, I drank everything, and a lot of alcoholics I've spoken to, they had a particular tipple, a poison. Vodka seems to be very popular, but they tended to be one thing or the other. I know one guy who just had innumerable, like a generation of cans of Guinness in his wardrobe, and that was his thing. But I mean, I would drink lager in pubs because to me, the measures in pubs for spirits weren't strong enough. So I resented buying those in the pub. I would only drink spirit. I would drink spirits at home and put a great big, you know, a nice liberal measure in it. 8 counts, I would call them, where you count to 8, and then that's you know, you pour the bottle and that's your shot, and then you put the little tiny splash of Coke or whatever in it. So I would drink spirits at home and wine as well, depending on if I was with a lady that liked drinking wine, then I'd go with that, you know. But I'd drink red, white, rosé, whatever. But in the pub, I drink pints. Yeah, in the pub, I drink pints and spirits at home a lot of the time, or at parties and stuff. It would be spirits.
Were you drinking to forget, or were you drinking to get drunk, or were you drinking to be happy, or were you drinking just because you wanted to feel better from the hangover the day before?
You know what? I mean, I at the time I thought I just liked drinking, and I thought, you know, it was my dad, when we had conversations about drinking, because he would admit in his more candid moments that he was an alcoholic, you know, and he had an issue with it. And my granddad as well, you know, his dad was an alcoholic too, but he said one time, drinking is an anesthetic for life. And that's what it was for me. I think that's what I saw it as. It was escapism. It was something that, you know, I think when you do that thing where you have, you know, like some people might go on holiday, like a bunch of people in their 20s might go on holiday for, let's say, 2 weeks in Magaluf, right? And they would drink every day, and everybody will get back saying, God, my God, I need a fucking liver transplant, you know, when I get home. And it's all jokes, but they will get back to their normal life after that, and it won't really affect them. They will drink as much as an alcoholic would, or maybe even more so. But somewhere they have that inbuilt normalcy, balance, and what's the word, moderative ability to moderate to an extent where they can go crazy and then forget about it. Whereas with me, I just always wanted to keep going. You know what I mean? If we had a massive skinful on a Sunday night, I want to drink on a Monday. I remember in later years, in the Facebook years, when I was trying to live in that double life of, you know, interviewing the likes of Sugar Ray Leonard or Roy Jones or whoever else, but was the backstory was pretty dysfunctional. I remember some days when I'd have stuff to do or meetings to go to, and I'd be looking at the bottle of spirits or even maybe just a can of Kronenberg on the side of the bedside table, and it'd be this struggle of thinking, do I hate to have a slug now and cancel all my appointments today and make excuses, or do I get this out of the way first, get to the gym, get to wherever I said I'd be? You know, it might have been a studio situation. And sometimes I'd have that first fatal sip and be like, okay, that Monday's a write-off. You know what I mean? I never had that cut-off point. It was the thing. I think your question, to an extent, addressed how much of it was trying to cover up. Might be pain. It might be, you know.
I mean, that's like almost the cliched. You know, when you watch films or read books, someone's always got a reason for being an alcoholic. There's something back in their story, whether that's a reality or not. I mean, there may be the case.
I would always have rejected it early doors, because the simple fact is I was too full of ego to admit that. Low self-esteem, I'm not going to admit I've got that. I'm fucking brilliant, don't forget. Do you know what I mean? That was my attitude, yeah? So I couldn't say the words low self-esteem. It was worse than saying alcoholic. It had to be just that I was a party animal and, you know, and 12 times the size of God, and that's why I had too much appetite. It couldn't possibly be because of any inadequacies I had. Do you see what I mean? So it's only, I mean, I've been sober 4 years now, and I've had a little bit of time to think. And I do see, although I don't think I had classically low self-esteem, and I certainly, you couldn't sense it, I don't think, in interaction with me. If anything, you'd see the ego and the arrogance and the confidence and all the rest of it. But looking back, I think I was quite misplaced. You know, I was never good enough for myself. Do you know what I mean? I never was good enough for myself. I wasn't happy in my own skin. That was the big thing for years and years. And I never got it. I never understood it. And I didn't really know it. But I look back at my behaviours and the way I felt, and the kind of whole castle built on sand that my life was. And I think, you know, I wasn't happy. Yeah. And I will hold my hands up and admit that now, but I never would have done back then.
When you were heavily drinking on a regular daily basis, were any friends or families trying to make you aware of the dangers, or make you aware of the path you were going down? Or
I think my mum was a little bit concerned sometimes, but I think to an extent she likes drinking as well, but obviously she's just blessed with not being an alcoholic. But I mean, my mum, she's a little older now, inevitably. So she doesn't drink as much as she used to. But there was a time, certainly in the 90s, I remember, wine was absolutely mandatory with everything. You know what I mean? You could almost go for a haircut. She'd say, well, should we take some wine or should we get some wine? But she was just a person who enjoyed drinking and liked the good things in life and liked wine. So I think she didn't want to. I mean, she was well aware of the precedent of my dad and my granddad. She'd seen him at his worst as well, you know. So, but I don't think she wanted to believe that I was. I think she said one time, "I don't think you're an alcoholic. I just think you're a heavy drinker." I think there is a difference. But you know, certainly when I got sober, she was really happy about that. But I don't think she ever. I don't recall her ever saying to me, "I think you need to stop drinking." I think she just said to me, "Take care, you know, don't go mad," kind of thing. And same with other family members, like my aunt, who was the kind of sister of my father. She just said, "Oh, if I were you, I'd just save it for the occasional piss up. Watch yourself a bit because it might be in the genes, etc., etc." But nobody really got hold of me, to be honest, who was in that kind of blood-related kind of vanguard. No.
Because it seems that, well, it is, alcohol is a socially acceptable drug, and that people, you can drink and get drunk, and you won't be judged in the same way that if you were taking drugs. I mean, you mentioned heroin or even marijuana or even smoking these days. You'll be judged if you smoke, whereas alcohol, even now, you can get drunk and nobody will think anything worse of you for it.
No, and I think, like you said, and it's a double standard, and it obviously doesn't. There's no real moral logic to it. It's purely convention and society and norms, you know, socially. I mean, you know, those programs like Booze Britain and whatnot. If you're from a country where it's not normal to drink that much and to get spannered every weekend, and and piss in alleyways and get off with a post box and things like that, and eat the kebab box instead of the kebab. They'd probably think it was really evil, wouldn't they? Like a heavily Muslim country or something, they could probably look at it and be like, look, these are infidels. This is Sodom and Gomorrah. But to us, like you say, it's normal. No matter what horrible states people get into, and all the violence. I mean, don't get me wrong, Kieran. I still think drinking socially is great. I would hate to become pious and start looking askance at people who are just enjoying themselves. I think there's a fine line. I think there's an awful lot of alcoholics about, and I think it is dangerous. But you know what I mean? I still think when I see people on Facebook saying, oh, well, not even 10 a.m. yet, I'm in the airport lounge with such as, I know not recently in the pandemic have we seen these kind of posts, but we normally do. And I see people saying, oh, I'm with the lads, we're in the airport lounge, we're already on the Dom Perignon, it's going to get messy. I still think that's great. It's bonding, it's, you only live once, and I would support that. But like you say, we do get ourselves as a nation into some terrible states drinking that it's got a lot to answer for. And as you say, but because it's legal and because it's part of our culture, we give it a pass, I think, don't we?
You mentioned as well having to cancel meetings and appointments because of the alcohol and its effects on you. How often would you have to cancel a meeting, or how did you manage to work, or how did you manage to function day to day when you were consuming massive amounts of alcohol?
I'll give you an example, because we're talking about, by my 40s, it wasn't funny anymore. It wasn't big, it wasn't clever, and it wasn't funny. And whereas I might have flaunted it in previous years, I might have lived in a house, in a band, for instance, with, like in South Wimbledon in 2000, I lived with a couple of kids who were 10 years younger than me or thereabouts. And we were in a band. I say we were in a band. We did 2 gigs the whole time. The rest of it, we just, drank, enough vodka to take out the Soviet army, got in trouble, got arrested, went busking, all the rest of it. So back then, it was all cool. I would never have hidden my drinking then. But by the time I was about 42, I remember living in a house in Wanstead with a flatmate who's still a friend of mine today, although he did end up wanting to leave and he moved out because of my drinking and instability. But I remember I suddenly started to drink covertly in my room because I didn't want him to see that I was drinking Southern Comfort or Jack Daniels on a Monday or Tuesday night. Don't get me wrong. He would drink as much. He drank like the next person at the weekend because he was a bit younger than me, and he would come home in some terrible states on a Friday or Saturday and be like, "Oh my God, I've had to give my phone to the taxi driver because I couldn't pay him," and all this kind of stuff. But then Monday he'd be taking care of business, whereas I'd be drinking covertly in my room. So to give you an example of that period in my early 40s, when I was suddenly hiding it and I knew it wasn't right, and I knew it was definitely an issue, I had a fighter around about that era called Frankie Monkhouse, and he never said anything. But at the end of the day, when you're sweating out alcohol and hungover every day, when we ended up falling out, he finally came out the home truths and he said, forever late, forever hungover, reeking of alcohol, or sometimes you just plain weren't there, because I would cancel and say, you know what, I've got to go do this. So can you just do this today? Give me 4 rounds of skipping, 4 rounds of shadow. And he knew he wasn't getting the care and input that that any fighter deserves, whether it was him or anybody else. So when he got 3 wins with me, and then he got knocked out or stopped by a dangerous Eastern European import who hadn't read the script. And as soon as that happened, he left me and went to Alec Wilkie. At the time, I got the hump because that's what alcoholics do. It's not my fault. Can't possibly be, can it? It's his fault. It's their fault. He's underhanded. And you know what? He can't fucking fight anyway. It's not my fault he got knocked out. Stick me in the ring. I'd have chinned the geezer. But, and all that. So, but I don't blame him for leaving me, Frank Monkhouse or any other fighter who might have done that back then, because he wasn't getting my A game. He was getting my D- game at best. And he knew what it was, People don't like to. I think as much as people don't like to admit they're alcoholics, people don't really like to tell people they're alcoholics either, And there's no point unless somebody's ready to accept it themselves. So that's what would happen. I would have a fighter for a while, and they would go elsewhere because, let's say, we might get a couple of wins here and there, but my head wasn't in the game, and I would miss sessions.
So when you got to your 40s, late 30s, 40s, I mean, what effects was the alcohol having on your body at this stage?
Well, the hangovers were bad, and then suddenly they stopped being as bad. I think that there's a phase to it. I think you can almost drink yourself into another phase of alcoholism where the hangovers weren't actually as bad. I remember hangovers being terrible in like 1999 and not so bad by 2009, although obviously they still happened. I got away with it, I think, aesthetically for quite a long time. It wasn't in bad shape. To be honest with you, it wasn't until the end of my drinking. I mean, I got sober in 2017. By that point, I had finally put on weight and got a beer gut and puffed out a lot. And then obviously you might have noticed when I got sober and started training again, I went through this kind of extreme vanity phase of spray tans and posting pictures of myself saying, you know, looking good, all that kind of thing, which I don't do anymore, by the way, because I mean, it was cool. I look back on that time and think that was important then, but it's just not important anymore. But I think I had finally started to get a little fat from it, but it took a very long time, to be honest with you.
What personal relationships have yours suffered because of the drinking over the years?
Well, while we were never compatible to begin with, it totally ruined things with the mother of my kids. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't. We were never right for each other to begin with. I'm sure she would admit that, and I don't wish things had been different or anything like that. You know, I mean, I've got a beautiful girlfriend today, and I'm happy in the situation I'm in, and that's what I'm about. But obviously it made that relationship difficult and fraught and volatile, etc., and disastrous. It affected the relationship with my kids for years as well, because they weren't getting my full attention. I'm really glad that I got sober when I did, because when I did, my youngest son was 7. Now he's 11, and he doesn't really remember me drinking, even now. But if it had carried on much longer the way I was going and what was happening back then he would, and I'm sure he wouldn't have the same kind of view of me that he's got today. We've got a good relationship and a good bond today. My eldest son's autistic, so he's not really attuned to these things so much. But you know, when he was born prematurely and nearly died of something called necrotizing enterocolitis, and he was in hospital for 6 months before we ever got him home. So much drinking was going on during that whole period, so many arguments, so many, occasionally the police being called, and just all this dysfunction while you're trying to put a brave face on and go to the neonatal unit every day to see your son, who you don't know if he's going to live or die, you know, that day. It was just a very fraught time, and I think it wouldn't be an easy thing to go through anyway, but I'd much rather have gone through it sober now that I know what sober actually means. So certainly it ruined other relationships as well. I got into relationships after that I always said it wasn't that, but if you spoke to one or two of the girls that I saw after that, they would tell other people, it was the drinking, I couldn't handle it anymore. And I'd be like, oh, that's just their excuse, you know what I mean? That's the scapegoat, you know, they just don't want to admit it's something else. But you know, and I was very nomadic. Like I say, the flatmate I told you about, he left. I don't know if this is the actual straw that broke the camel's back, but one thing which didn't endear him to me was I drank a priceless bottle of whiskey he had. There was only 750 of them ever made. It was something called Dunhillion in a really nice box. It was never ever meant to be drank. It was only ever bought for him by an ex-girlfriend to appreciate in value and assets. He never meant to drink it. And I was like, you know, I steady on, mate. It's, you know, show me a man who's got a bottle of whiskey, not for drinking. I'll show you a fool. You know, so I was like, surely I can replace it. And he was like, no, you fucking can't, because it's, well, he said, I'd be surprised if you can get another one, and it'll might cost you a couple of grand, whatever. And I was like, oh, right. So it's a shame I didn't just go to the off license to get myself some white horse whiskey from, you know, the co-op, isn't it? But so it affected relationships of people I would cohabit with, you know, flatmates and stuff, partners, children, fighters, we've already described, you know, kind of everything really, you know, and even friends. I'd have good friends who knew the score who'd be bailing me out when I'd be calling them saying, listen, I'm getting nicked because I've had a fight with the Indian restaurant people because my card wouldn't go through. And obviously I was drinking on a card while waiting for someone to pay me money. I'd know I wouldn't have any money when I went into this restaurant. This is the nadir of my life, very much around the time when people were saying things about me and tickets and all the rest of it, right? You know, because honestly, Kieran, I was spinning all these plates disastrously because I was doing quite well on one level. You know, I was moving in certain circles boxing wise, and I had a certain degree of reputation, enough to be able to put, you know, trips on like big fight nights with the likes of Bruno and you know, Nigel Benn, or taking trips to Vegas and Monte Carlo. So a lot of money was whizzing around you know, that I was supposed to be looking after at that point, and I was mismanaging things rather, you know, horrendously. So I'd have a friend who I'd be expecting some money later on at maybe 10 p.m. So I'd go into a restaurant at 8 p.m. thinking, well, I'll just have a long meal on my own and I'll keep drinking the whole time, which was obviously the important bit. And then, you know, by the time it comes to paying the bill, the money will be in there, that is such an alcoholic premise. You know, there's no way I would do anything like that sober, or like go out to a restaurant if I didn't have any money. Back then, it'd be like, it'll be all right, I'll wing it. You know what I mean? So I'd have a friend who would call me just at random while I'd be jostling with the police over this kind of type scenario. And he would say, listen, put them on to me, I'll pay it, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I had one friend in particular who was very, very loyal and long-suffering like that. But he said at one point he had given up hope, you know, on me. He thought, you know, he will never get sober. That's what he thought, you know. So it was a surprise to him initially when I did.
At what point of your life did you start thinking, I've got to do something about this? When did the alarm bells, if you like, start ringing that you've got to take what for you at the time would have been drastic action? I mean, did you consider first trying to drink less? So I suppose if you feel you're drinking too much, you just drink less, maybe drink once or twice over the weekend instead of drinking.
Yeah, I probably did, but that never works, by the way. It never works. You know, there's another passage in the AA book and it says, we tried everything, you know, but half measures availed us of nothing. It says, you know, we tried only drinking, not drinking at home, only drinking at home, only drinking spirits, never drinking spirits. One favourite one is I'm only going to drink Guinness. Because how harmful can that be? That's all good old, it's healthy, right? It's like a meal. It's got nutrients in it and all sorts. You know, so I've heard that one quite a lot. I'm only going to drink Guinness. And I probably went through that kind of phase, you know, as well. But that never worked. Alarm bells, they came and went. I'd be like, oh, I've got to stop this. I went to an AA meeting in 2014 and in Canning Town, which was somewhere I attended lots of meetings at when I properly got sober. And I thought it was fair enough what they were saying, you know, and I did, because you know what it was? The day that I went to this meeting, the first one I ever went to, I actually went to a Matchroom barbecue and interviewed Eddie Hearn and all this kind of thing. But I was so torn up inside. I was going through a relationship there were problems and she was getting fed up and trying to distance herself. And the more kind of, when you're hungover and crestfallen, you become even more emotionally needy and you're like, oh, you know, don't jog me on because of this, I'll sort it, all that kind of rubbish. And so I remember I interviewed James DeGale, Eddie Hearn and a few other people, and there was free booze at the party as well. And I remember I was so sick of drinking and felt so bad that day. I didn't even drink and it was all free. And I remember thinking, I'd Googled AA meetings and found there was one in Canning Town at the time near where I was living, or I think it was near where I was living. I forget where I was living half the time. I lived in so many different places, so nomadic. And I went to the meeting and I thought it was okay what they were saying. It made sense, but I didn't get it. The penny didn't drop, you know. So I don't think I drank that night as such as soon as I got out of the meeting, but I was drinking certainly within days of having attended it. And then I went to another one not so long after that up the road in Poplar. And once again, I thought it was good stuff. I thought, you know, I can see what they're saying here, but I just couldn't imagine not having that, you know, that love affair with alcohol. I couldn't imagine that not being in my life. And it still seemed like a very awful thing there was this sense of, you know, has it come to this? Is this my life now? Because they seemed nice people who had improved themselves, but it all seemed a bit dour. I couldn't get the beauty and the magic of it at the time, which is strange now the way I look at it today. But at the time I remember thinking, I still wasn't ready. I was hoping there was a swerve. You know, there's another little alleyway somewhere that you can go down. Not the one they've had to go down, the one of total honesty at the really bright, searing white light on one's soul. Surely there's a shortcut or something, because that's what alcoholics tend to think. They don't want to get honest. They don't want to get sober, you know, initially, until they do. And then one day they talk about that rock bottom. I think that comes to the point when you really are ready to toss in the towel. And then when, you know what, when people say to you, oh, well done, mate, wish I had your willpower, that's some strength of character. I think that's all bollocks, to be honest with you. I think it comes, I cannot stress it enough, it is about surrendering and compliance. When you're really like, okay, I've seen where my ego and my thinking has got me. Much as it pains me, I'm going to try and do it the way these people said, because they just seem so bloody happy and healthy and well situated and successful. Some of them, a lot of them, you know, and apparently they used to be in a gutter like me, you know. So, do you know what I mean? I tried it, but I was still not quite ready to get honest and to really give myself entirely to that program and recovery. And when you're an alcoholic, you know, you're never going to make it until you do, until you give not a little bit or 80% or 90%. You give everything 100% to it, or otherwise, I just don't think you're going to make it.
You've already touched on some of the boxing events you were involved in. You've interviewed Sugar Ray Leonard, just to name one very famous boxer, a boxing legend. Were people who were around you, were they all aware that you had alcohol problem, or was it something that you would hide from people? And were you consciously hiding it from people? Because you were very successful you're very well respected within boxing circles.
Yeah.
You got lots of friends within boxing at the highest level. So were these people aware that you did have an alcohol problem?
A lot of them weren't, Kieran. And you said, I mean, did I hide it? I did hide it. You know, there's a friend of mine in AA who's been sober for years and years, maybe, you know, it's over 15 years he's been sober for. And he's a good friend of mine today. And I fooled him. He even said, you haven't got a problem. Because I would be drinking at the bar at boxing events, and I talked to them because it would come up in conversation they didn't drink and that they were in AA, because most alcoholics are pretty upfront about it. They're like, oh no, you know, I was murder around all that and I had to stop and I'm in AA now. And I would always express interest. I'd be like, oh really? Because I knew I needed to go, really, and I knew I'd have to one day. I was just trying to string it out as long as I possibly could, I suppose. And I said to him, you know, I think sometimes I would always say to people like that, sometimes I think I need to do that. And this guy looked at me, he said, you ain't got a problem, Ben. And I was like, really? No. And I thought, oh, well, there you go. There's a free pass there. And Mick Guilford, who's also a good friend of mine, who you probably know from boxing and social media, he knows this guy well. And he said to him later on, how the fuck could you tell Ben Doughty that he doesn't have a problem? He said, what planet are you on, having been through what you've been through, that you didn't see it? He said, you know, because Mick says, if you've got it, you spot it. So he ribs Michael these days, saying, how did you let that one slip through the net, and tell him that he was okay? But to answer your question, I would hide it, yeah. And you know, like you, I don't know if you drink or whatever, but you're a normal drinker, right? You enjoy a drink sometimes.
Yep.
So I imagine, here's the thing: if you went out to a Christmas party, yeah, or we all had a get together when this pandemic's over, all the Facebook boxing people, all the good sorts like yourself and many others, all got together for a party, yeah. You could drink there, and I imagine you could drink without guilt. And if you were pissed, you'd admit it. You could get properly pissed, right? And you could be like, fucking hell. Because I see people who are really pleasantly pissed, and they say, all right, Ben, I'm as drunk as 10 men. And that I was always trying to pretend I wasn't drunk. And you almost start thinking, well, why am I doing this? When I'm pouring all this stuff down my neck at, you know, a damaging rate of knots. And I'm trying to override its effects and try and stay sober so people don't realize I'm a pisshead. What is, you know what I mean? It's so very complicated because there was too much guilt there. So yeah, I would hide it. And to be honest with you, most people didn't know. Some people knew, or some people suspected, certainly, because, you know, you're always going to have the cracks that appear. People who are very close to me knew, but a lot of people who came into contact with me, business level or, you know, whatever, they didn't know. No.
And have there been business opportunities lost because of your alcoholism?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. I think when I was doing because initially I did the trip to Vegas to go see Mayweather Madonna 2. That was my first kind of stateside venture in a commercial way, where I just advertised it on Facebook, got some people on board and booked some flights and did a thing. One of the people who came with us was a very successful property developer, multimillionaire, and he was up for investing in certain things I was doing because he had a whale of a time on the Vegas trip, and he had the kind of money, you know, that could really make things happen. Still has got it, and me and him might have been ready to do certain things then. I mean, we were actually going to launch a British Boxing Hall of Fame before we ended up getting beaten to the punch by the people down in Sussex, you know, who do that British Boxing Hall of Fame now. So I put so much publicity out about it that some people even thought it was mine, even when it came out. I remember Nick Manners tagging me in the writer in Boxing News saying, well done, Ben Doughty. And I was like, it wasn't me, I fucked it up. You know, because the York Hall were going to let me use it for free. I pitched them so well, and they liked the idea and the procedure so much. They said I could have the venue for nothing, but then I had to cancel the original date. I messed up financially with the accounts. I mean, it was more carnage, you know. because that was the thing with me. I could always verbally, I could be very impressive. I mean, I was supposed to ghostwrite Jimmy Batten's autobiography for him. The taping was easy. That bit we had conversations, because that bit wasn't hard work for me. But because I was always drinking every night and usually pissed by about 10, 9:30, 10 o'clock every night, I couldn't sit down and write. I didn't have the clarity of mind or the kind of serenity of spirit to be writing. So I kept stringing Jimmy along for a couple of years until eventually he said, listen, this is not going to happen. Let's not fall out over it, but I need to get someone else to do it. So, do you know what I mean? I think circa 2014, perhaps I was ready to break through in certain areas, but my drinking just stopped me.
Was there a eureka moment, if you like, where you finally said, I'm going to AA, or I'm finally going to stop drinking?
There was, yeah. It was March the 22nd, 2017. On the 21st, I'd had a real skinful, and I got into an altercation in a branch of Tesco's on the Barking Road, near where the World Cup statues are. Long story short, I got into an altercation with someone in the store, and then the next day.
Sorry, were you drunk or under the influence of alcohol?
I've been drinking all day. Yeah, been drinking all day, and then I went to see. At the time, I didn't have a fixed abode. I was commercially paying for myself. I was staying in hostels, like backpacker type hostels. There was one, so on the Barking Road, in that kind of West Ham, Green Street kind of, stronghold. And it was, I found places in King's Cross and Camden and the East End and East London that were only like a tenner a night to stay in. And there'd be other people hanging out, young people or older people traveling around London on a budget. And because I was always working and doing little bits like, PT sessions or working with a fighter. So, I mean, one of Robert Sagler's fights, pro fights, we're taking pictures in the ring, at the York Hall for the press and stuff. Then later on, I'd be drinking till God knows when, and then I'd be staying in a hostel. And sometimes I hadn't even booked myself a hostel. I'd just be like, I'll find one later. I've got maybe a little bit of money in my pocket, in the purse, I'd have stuff in storage, by the way. A friend would have my stuff in storage while I was in between flats. That happened for quite a while, that silly situation where I wasn't really of any particular fixed abode. I wasn't on the street, don't get me wrong, I wasn't. But I was floating, So the day after, it was March 22nd, 2017, I went to see, because I've messed up my bank accounts as well, but after all that ticket problems, Barclays jogged me on and said, I'm afraid we can't be your bankers anymore. So I didn't have a bank account because they'd kicked me out. And I'd lost my passport on a bender, so I suddenly didn't have that, which meant it harder to get another one, because I didn't really have any ID. I was checking into hotels with my British Boxing Board of Control laminate. Sometimes I said, look, it's obviously me. What's wrong with that? That's a proper organisation. They've been going since 1929. I'm telling you this partly because I've got nothing to hide, and also because I want you to understand the madness, the madness of it all. It might sound quite comical, but it's not funny, really. Do you know what I mean? So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ben, and I should have asked you this earlier, I suppose, but when you were drunk, were you an angry drunk or a happy drunk, or is that trying to pigeonhole something, a personality?
It probably does, but I was happy a lot of the time, and I was an emotional drunk, certainly, and a sentimental drunk. Absolutely, was I. I wasn't angry most of the time, but obviously I could get arrogant. Even social media back in the days, a few times I went off and got involved in some silly vendettas with people, just because of my ego and the whole idea of, don't you realise who I am, all that crap, And I'd be arguing with people who achieved much more than I ever did in the physical side of the boxing ring, and I'd be calling them out, threatening to knock them out cold on some, whatever neutral venue we could agree on, and all that kind of nonsense. Just ego, and frustration maybe that I didn't do what I should have done, as a boxer, because I wasn't bad, but once again, it was something that I didn't fulfill that potential, So I think there was always this thing that I was trying to live those dreams vicariously by rubbing shoulders with the likes of Sugar Ray Leonard and the heroes that I had. But it was on. So no, I wasn't always angry, but I was capable of being arrogant and confrontational. That could happen. And I must admit, these days when I don't go to meetings, because obviously the pandemic's affected that, what I watch for now, I never feel like a drink these days, or I haven't for a very long time. But I notice myself sometimes getting a bit self-important and a bit, returning to old attitudes. So I try to keep an eye on that to make sure I'm not getting too. I don't want to see that arrogance and ugliness return, But on March the 22nd, 2017, I had to go and see my ex, the mother of my children, to get some money because my mother had given her some money for me. She couldn't put it in my bank account because I didn't have one anymore. And I had to go and see her. And she basically gave me a bit of a dressing down and, told me what a bad loss I was and how I was really not hitting the entry level of acceptability for parenting. And she basically said, take this money and stay away. I don't want you to see the kids. So that's, so that was my rock bottom. I had 3 drinks on the 22nd. That's the day I was telling you about. On the 23rd was the day she gave me that speech, and I didn't drink at all. I found an AA meeting that was happening in Brick Lane that night. It was a Thursday, 23rd of March, 2017. I went to an AA meeting that night, and that was my eureka moment. And I have not had a drink since. That was over 4 years ago now. And I finally had enough in a way on another level, because I just felt when she was telling me she didn't want me around the kids, and that just generally I was a failure in every way, despite I thought I was so great, she was stressing, but really you realise you've achieved fuck all in your life and everybody's gone past you because you were so sucked into your own ego, you know what I mean? So I felt kind of low a little bit because I had nothing. Normally I'd have my own kind of ego to come back with and I'd be like, yeah, bollocks. But at this point it really hit home because I had no defense to it. And so I went to an AA meeting that night, and then I started to get sober, and I've stayed sober ever since, and it has been really fantastic, to be honest with you.
Did you go to that AA meeting 100% committed to getting sober, or was it, you mentioned in the past you made some half-hearted efforts, but did you go into that meeting saying this is it now, that this is the end of the drinking?
You know what, I didn't. I can't explain it. It was just, I mean, I do think there was an element of divine intervention. You're probably aware that AA espouses the notion and reliance on a higher power. Regardless, it doesn't, AA orthodox teaching does not deign to tell you who your higher power is or impose any conditions around that, but it tells you to believe in something other than the man in the mirror and hand things over to that higher power. And I do feel as if I was directed in some way, because I sat in the meeting and I was at my lowest ebb, basically, but I felt in the meeting, unlike the other times I went, which was about 2 previous times, I felt good, I felt happy, and I was listening to the chair, which is the main speech in a meeting where somebody tells you their particular story of recovery, and then they open the meeting up so other people can talk back to them, and share between them. And there was a Scottish fella telling his story, and it wasn't necessarily like mine, but although there were similarities, and it just resonated with me. And I was like, well, I think I get this in a way I've never got it before, I left the meeting. There was a guy in the meeting who looked particularly healthy and glowing and happy, and he said to me, "You're in for a glorious journey." And I just, for some reason, I actually believed him. I thought, I think there's something in this. And obviously, I didn't know what was ahead of me. I didn't know what it was all about still. But I thought that was good. And I walked away, having had the worst day ever in the morning. And I felt hopeful, which I hadn't felt in a long time. And I went to another meeting the following lunchtime at Barking, and I liked that as well. And I spoke and all the rest of it. Then somebody in the meeting said to me, "Come to Victoria Park meeting tonight. It's near Victoria Park, the building, and we have a meeting." They said afterwards we go for food. It's called fellowship. So I went to another meeting. That was 3 meetings in 2 days. So obviously I was committed. But when you first got into boxing, which I imagine was a very long time ago, when you're just really into something, you're really into going. If you want to seek it out because you want to find it. Whether you're looking for old boxing magazines or whether you're searching a Welsh boxing legend, when you're really hungry for it. I was like that with it suddenly. I wanted to go. It wasn't like, oh my God, I better sort this out because it's killing me, man. So I went to the meeting on the night time as well, and I went to the restaurant with various people, and I was chatting to a couple of young ladies who were telling me their story. They were young and kind of groovy and pretty, which mattered because I was still thinking, I hope this is not some kind of old meth head brigade, And then I went to another meeting the next day. So that was my 4th meeting in 3 days. And then they say, if you've been sober for at least 24 hours, you can get a chip. And then in this particular meeting, it was a trendy kind of Bethnal Green meeting with a lot of the bright young things of AA would populate it. So you get this rousing ovation for picking up your chip, you know, for saying you're 24 hours sober, which actually I was about 72 hours sober when I got it. And yeah, I mean, my life turned around from that day, that week, and I kept going. And suddenly I was buzzing off not drinking in a way I never thought was possible.
How difficult was it initially, especially the not drinking and also the social side of it? If your life evolves around going out to pubs, meeting people and having a drink, I mean, how difficult was that side of it?
I think I was really blessed in that it wasn't that difficult at all, because I think I was just really ready for it. I think because as I've described to you, it took me so long to get to the gateway of sobriety. I drank for so many years so excessively that I think I was really ready for recovery. And to be honest with you, I'd started to isolate so much. It wasn't really social for me anymore, drinking. I wasn't really drinking. I swear to God, I've not lost one friend over getting sober. You know, when I say lost a friend, you know, someone you just fall out of touch with or whatever because you don't see them anymore. Because I know that was one of my dad's things. All his mates and peer group were based in the local pubs. But I didn't. There was nobody I was close to when I was drinking that I'm not close to because I stopped drinking. You know, because my drinking had become such a solo affair. Because you know what I would do in a lot of those years, I would sit in a pub on my own drinking. After I got out of the gym, I would go to the nearest pub or whatever pub I liked, and I would sit on my own doing Facebook threads. So I wasn't Billy No Mates, I was Billy Facebook Mates, because I was on my own physically. But you know what it's like with social media. You're never alone because of the way we live today, especially those of us who are passionate about something like boxing, right? And we've got a bit of a following. You know, you do your interviews, you've got your particular Welsh boxing kind of angle going on. Yeah. So you know, you're never short of good chat, I imagine. Yeah. Of a night time because we can interact with each other. So I would sit in the pub on my own like a Billy No Mates, but I was talking to my adoring Facebook following, right? And that made me feel good because I was a bit with somebody on that kind of whole online bollocks, and it kind of went to my head a little bit. And so I was sitting there drinking, feeding my ego, living in this kind of boxing Facebook world. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes, even when things got really bad, and I couldn't afford a hostel one night, I would sleep on the train between Brighton and King's Cross, but I was still on Facebook like nothing had happened. Literally, nobody knew. You know what I mean? So the point being that it becomes such an isolating affair that as soon as I got sober, I didn't really have to make those kind of decisions. I just went with it. I mean, I found the big difference was I go to boxing events and I would spend more time watching the boxing or doing what I was supposed to be doing, whatever it was, rather than constantly looking for an excuse. I'll give you an example. When Larry Olabamiwo fought Sam Sexton the second time in Norwich, I got my percentage. I think he got something like 2.5K, maybe. That's off the top of my head, right? I don't want to be divulging his purses, but I think I've told you what it was. Pretty sure. So trainer gets 10% of that, right? Now, when he's a journeyman, you don't really have to train him very much, Kieran, because he doesn't give a toss if he wins or loses, and neither do you really. Because, well, no, he doesn't want to win half the time. I mean, Larry was in that position. He could still have won fights like that. It wouldn't have, someone like Peter Buckley or Johnny Greaves, they absolutely didn't want to win. I know they don't want to win. And I know they're actually a bit embarrassed when they do win. With Larry, it was still there for him if he wanted it, but he wasn't ambitious anymore, and he was more about the money. So he didn't really care. So if he didn't care, neither did I. So I had my 250 quid or whatever I had in my pocket, yeah? Now, here's the thing. It was a long drive from London to Norwich. Now, all I'm thinking about is getting a drink, because one thing I wouldn't do is drink before a guy fought. I did one time at least, but normally I wouldn't do it. And on this occasion, I didn't do it. So that used to annoy me because I'd be waiting, we'd be on late. I'd be watching other people drinking. I'd be seeing people at the bar. I'd be like, well, I can't have a drink until this bloody fight's over. So suddenly, as soon as we finish, we've got the money and I've got my money and they all want to go. And it's a really packed car ride with a couple of other big people in the car, uncomfortable journey. And I want to relax and have a drink. So I said, well, he had a German client who come under his own steam to see him, and he was asking if there was any room in the car, and he said, no, we're full. And I was like, you know what? Making out that I'm such a nice guy, I said, he can have my place in the car. If I can I'll get a hotel for the night, and I'll stay here. So I went out on the piss with Sam Sexton, Mervyn Turner, and a few other people. We were in this VIP room drinking vodka in Norwich, and I was having it large with them, with the enemy, as it were, the people we fought, because I was more interested in drinking than I was getting back home. I would never do that now. I've got my little bit of money. I'll be like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll spend some of it on a hotel and the rest of it I'll piss it up against the wall tonight. But that gives you an example that's what I would do. That would be my priority. Once the fight was over, I had to get on it. And usually that's all it meant to me. We boxed, I got my 10% cut, and it was time to have a drink. Whereas what I found once I got sober was I actually started enjoying my time at those shows a lot more, because I would actually talk to people. I would watch boxing. If I was supposed to be, doing a corner, then I'd be more present, not just itching to get a pint down my neck, So it wasn't that difficult, to be honest with you, because I'd made such a mess of everything. I was just really grateful for another shot at life, and I didn't really have time to start thinking it's a shame I can't see what's his name down the pub anymore. And also, a couple of the people I've been drinking with at that time, a couple of people I've been drinking with towards the end, they're people who stabbed me in the back anyway, rather badly. So it wasn't like I lost friends. I just lost people who weren't really for me. You know what I mean?
What stage did you think the AA meetings started to make an impact in your life? Obviously, a positive impact. I mean, what stage did you start seeing your children again, or did you not ever?
That was quite quick. I mean, to be honest, they started making a positive impact literally from the word go. Literally from day one, they started making, and it was so. What's the word? It was so exponential. It was. I was on the crest of a wave. In AA circles, they call it a pink cloud, and some people get it, and they would say to me, some of the old timers are almost a little bit resentful when they see somebody on a pink cloud, because they're like, oh, you're on a pink cloud. You need to watch it, son. Don't get too high. Don't get too excited. And I was like, yeah, bollocks. Still some of that old arrogance coming out, But I had a pink cloud for a long time, so I was just like, this is great, and I get it. I mean, you might have seen it on my Facebook. I was really banging the drum, and because I really thought, I've got it. I've seen the light. You know what I mean? And I never thought that I could be that happy without drink, without drinking me. So the kids, to be fair, my ex-partner wasn't spiteful or vindictive. Because I do see people going through this on social media as well, where they're not allowed to see the kids. Soon as I demonstrated, obviously she wanted a little bit of, she needed a few weeks of consistency that she could see. But literally, I would say as soon as she reasonably could, within weeks, she was like, okay, right, well, you look like you're sober for now. Looks like you're trying. So fair enough, the kids can come. I got myself a place very soon after. I think if I got sober March 23rd, I moved into a new place on April 3rd. So I had a proper home again. Go on.
Sorry, go on. You go on, Ben.
And I so valued it. It was only a shared house at the time in East Ham. But I really valued it in a way I've never valued a place before. I thought, and I got an alcoholic friend, who was in recovery, gave me a big TV, and I got a fire stick. Just silly little simple things. But I thought, my God, I caught up on all these movies I'd never watched because I never had the attention span, like Goodfellas. I mean, obviously I was always into boxing, but I started watching stuff like, say, classics like Goodfellas that I'd never really watched before, and I thought, my God, I really love being sober, and I like doing some of these normal things, which I enjoyed a coffee, sitting out in the garden because we had a back gardening space, having a cookie and a coffee. I started going running again and doing all that, and I just felt reborn again, and I felt like I got a new shot at life again. There was absolutely no time and inclination to lament about what was gone, because Mick Guilford said to me some time ago when I was still in the madness and I wasn't about to come out of it at that particular point, he said to me, you can't think of it as giving up drinking. You've got to take up sobriety. Otherwise you feel like you've lost something. He said, you have to take up this and embrace it. You can't give up that. He said, how well has that served you anyway? It's nothing to give up. It's just it's an albatross. So yeah, I mean, I know straight away. I mean, I got a roof over my head. I got the access to the kids back. Then it took a bit longer to get bank account. I mean, I've got bank accounts now, which is great. I mean, I do. It had been so long at one point before I'd actually done the chip, the contactless thing. All I could do for a while was take money out of a cash point because I still didn't have a proper account, etc., etc. But I got those things back. I got myself a passport, and certainly in 2018, I travelled quite a lot. To LA to see Fury and Wilder 1. I went to Marbella to go look for Marvin Hagler and not find him. I went to Marbella another time to train a client who was quite wealthy, who wanted me to train him while he was out on holiday. Where else did we go? We went somewhere else, I swear, as well. So I always look at it that at the Nadir, I had no bank account, no passport, no home, no access to my children. And obviously I got those things back quite quickly, and the thing is, I'm grateful for them. But, back then, I wasn't grateful back then, and that was the problem. And these days, I wouldn't take money for things. I never wanted to rip anybody off. When all that scandal broke, I never, ever, hand on heart, ever wanted to rip anybody off. And it never made sense for me to rip anybody off. That would have been, it was career suicide. It would have been, and it nearly was anyway.
Yeah.
But I would wing things and be like, it'll be okay. It'll be all right in the night. Never mind if I don't have these things now. I need this money to pay Frank Bruno today, or Frank Bruno's agent. I'll get those tickets next week. Do you know what I mean? And I've been wheeling and dealing like that for 2 solid years before the wheel fell off. It wasn't about the Brook Golovkin fight. It was just going to happen at some point, and that was the fight it happened on. And I'd narrowly averted that kind of disaster more than once. I was worried that this is going to be the big social media shitstorm. And a few times I managed to make sure it didn't happen that way, because I was just ducking and diving like that. But today, if you say to me, can I get you something, whether it's tickets to this or I could be skint, and you'd say, listen, do you want me to put 50 quid across to you now? You can get me such and such in 3 months' time. And if I wasn't sure if I could do it, I'd say, hang fire, Kieran, don't do that yet, because I'm not sure, because I've learned to be honest. Back then, I'd have said, yeah, go ahead, no problem, I'll sort it, because, you know what I mean? It was...
How long into your sobriety, if that's the correct term to use, did people around you started believing that you were going to stay sober, and this was the new Ben, if you like? Because a lot of people I know have said, "Oh, I've stopped drinking now," and a few months down the line or a few weeks down the line, they're drinking again. But how long was it before people started believing that this really was the new you?
Honestly, I'm not sure, because in AA circles, everybody's very positive, and they understand, and they only ever say one day at a time. What I noticed certainly after a year, what I noticed was people saying, "Oh, well, you've done it, haven't you? You'll never drink again. You're all right." And it won't surprise you to know that I said to them, "No, I literally take it one day at a time. I'm going to still do that." I mean, what did John Conte say? He said, I don't know if I'll never drink again, but I know I'm not going to drink today, and it's always today.
How close have you been to having a drink since that date in March when you quit?
Never been close to a relapse. The only time I was close to it was when I was about 47 days sober, and it's really precious to you in those days because you're counting days. And I ordered a Beck's Blue after an Xboxers meeting. They have the Xboxers meeting on Old Street in a place that used to be called the William Blake. And then sometimes some of us used to go to another place called the Britannia in Shoreditch afterwards. And I was with a bunch of people, some of them, like I'm trying to think, Prince Rodney and the likes of Mick Williamson, maybe, people like that. And I ordered a Beck's Blue because when I first got sober, I used to drink them pretend lagers occasionally in the pub. I don't do that anymore, but I did a few of those. I think a lot of people do in the early days. And the barman served me the real Beck's instead, and I took one sip of it, and I spat it out, and I said, "Excuse me, mate, that's Beck's normal." Rather annoyed. And he was like, sorry.
Beck's Blue is non-alcoholic lager for people who are not sure.
Yeah, Beck's Blue, is the. But it was so powerful because as soon as I tasted it, I knew that was the real stuff.
Did you feel any fear then? Did you feel fear for yourself or fear for your future at that point?
Not really fear for my future. I just felt, to be honest, I felt a bit anxious because I thought, oh, does that mean I've got to go back to day one now? What are the rules? Because I didn't know what the rules were. So I remember I went outside and got myself together, got my thoughts together, and was like, come on, don't overreact. It was all you did was to touch your lips, And then I went back in and got my normal, Beck's, the proper Beck's Blue, which there's no alcohol in it. And then I went to a meeting the next day and I told them about it, and they said, of course you don't have to go back to one day. They said volition is everything. You didn't know. You didn't drink it anyway. You might have ingested the tiniest bit. They said, it doesn't make a difference. And somebody else who was not in AA, but a good friend of mine, said, you were handed an opportunity to drink and you didn't do it. I'm proud of you, because I could have used as an excuse, I suppose. I could have said, well, today's a write-off, because that's the barman's fault. But Kieran, there was one time, I think, I can't remember if it was before or after that, but the last time I felt like a drink, last time I remember feeling a bit tempted, was just before Klitschko Joshua in 2017. We did a broadcast at Boxing Social, and it was me, Tim Witherspoon, Glenn McCrory, and Carl Greaves. And there was a lot of free booze in the office. It was our first kind of live broadcast that we ever did at Boxing Social in those early days of trying to launch.
I remember the broadcast, yeah.
And obviously everybody was celebrating afterwards, saying it was really good. We were all really good. Well done, congratulations. It's all free drink. There was Southern Comfort flying around, wine, beer, and I was just drinking a Diet 7-Up. And I remember thinking, just at that moment, I've been sober about 40 odd days, whatever. It was, Klitschko and Joshua was April the 29th, I believe. So I'd been sober since March 23rd. So you can do the maths, a few days before April 29th. So, and I remember thinking, God, if my dad could see me now, I'm with Tim Witherspoon, I'm with Glenn McCrory, this is the kind of echelons I'm in now, and there's free booze. And I was eyeing the half empty bottle of Southern Comfort, thinking, looked like they'd left it, because some people were starting to leave. I was thinking, well, back in the day, I'd have drank the free beer, then took that bottle with me home, and I'd have basked in the glory of my fabulous life that I'm a pundit alongside Glenn McCrory and Tim Witherspoon, all that kind of nonsense. But I didn't do it anyway. I remember having a pang of thinking, it would be quite nice to get on it tonight with the lads, with the boys, and I've never fancied a drink since, honest to God.
So if anyone's watching this interview who may be suffering alcohol problems, maybe looking for a bit of inspiration, perhaps by listening to this or watching this, I mean, what positive things have come out of you quitting drinking?
Everything, Kieran. I mean, for a start, I don't want to be melodramatic, but I think if I'd have carried on drinking the way I was doing, then there's a possibility I wouldn't be here anymore, because my father died at 50 from a cardio-related thing, heart attack, basically. He died at 50 when he was in the middle of a bender. I'm 51 now, and so we were almost exactly the same age, at the point when he passed away. As I've said to you, I didn't have a bank account, didn't have a passport. My reputation professionally was very low at the time, and needed some rebuilding. Hadn't seen my kids. One thing, I heard a line once, that I was looking at a hopeless end, but now I've got endless hope. So everything got better, because, see, the thing is, I enjoy life so much now. I mean, I know we've been in a pandemic and it's made things harder, but I've even enjoyed that, Kieran. When we were really locked down this time last year, I remember thinking, this is kind of cool, because the streets are quiet. I go for a run and it's all quiet, because you're still allowed to go for a run. I started to catch up with my reams and reams of old boxing magazines and finding little curios in there. I was a bit worried about how to pay the rent, because I thought, well, I might not be able, I can't work. But in the end, it turned out I could work, and I did Zooms and et cetera, et cetera. And, I've been okay through the pandemic. I've managed to make a living still and still be able to pay the rent. So, and when we get back to normal, I mean, I really enjoy things like traveling. I still love running. I love spending, it's even relationships. I love spending time at Natalie's. I spend some of the time at her house and some of the time at mine. I love the times on my own, the me time. I know she loves the she time. And I love the together time as well. And I love the time with the kids. There's a peace of mind that I never had before. When I was full of ego and a bit of fear, I'd say I'm still a little bit too macho to admit to fear, but go on, just don't tell anybody. I know we're on a podcast. Hopefully your circulation is not that large that it's not reaching a huge audience.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I wish actually. I hope as many people as possible see it. Joking aside, but when I was full of ego and fear and discontent, I was never really enjoying things like you should enjoy them. I mean, like I remember I interviewed Anthony Joshua one time just before he beat Dylan White in 2015, and I'd been on such a bender, I'd gone missing for like a few days, and Lee Eaton, who was running the show, wasn't sure whether I was going to turn up, but bless him, he kept the gig open for me. He had Spencer on speed dial at least, just in case he needed a substitute. And I would make the point that Spencer is the second choice. He should never be the first. I'm only joking. He's more successful than me, so I could say that he should be magnanimous about it. But Lee was not sure if I was going to turn up. And long story short, I did turn up, but I was absolutely rattling, and I had to have a few pints just to get myself through it. But I remember feeling okay with the microphone in my hand, talking to AJ. And God bless him, he never seemed to notice there was anything wrong with me. But it was just it's no way to live. It was no, and you know what? The next day, I went to a show in Bristol with Larry Oliver again, and I had a funny episode to do with my drinking. Kind of half collapsed, and ended up when he was fighting, I was in the back of the ambulance that was supposed to be for the fighters, getting a nebulizer, and Dominic Ingle was doing his corner too, and then Dominic Ingle took a dim view of me back. We're cool now, but he took a dim view of me back then because he sees this wreck of a man who's supposed to be looking after a fighter, who can't even keep himself together long enough to get to the corner. And then when me and Dominic had an altercation about something at the Eubank Junior Reynold Quinlan weigh-in a little time after that, he said I'd been slagging off his fighters because he believed I had been. And I said I hadn't, but I did say to him, I'm an independent boxing journalist and I'll say what I want. And he said, no, you're not. You're an alcoholic. So it created a lot of bad ripples for me. You know what I mean? I was creating a bad impression of myself. Some people liked me and gave me a pass, and some people didn't like me. But they all, not all of them, but some of them could see that things weren't right.
What advice would you give to someone who feels they're going down the wrong path where alcohol is concerned?
One thing I would say, which is something that a wonderful old boy who goes to the meetings in Canning Town says, or he said a few times, and he said it when I first went in. He said, to anyone who thinks you might be an alcoholic, I would rather suggest that you probably are one, or else it simply would not have occurred to you in the first place, he said. And I do believe that. I think normal drinkers don't need to regulate. When people say, oh, I need to do this, or I've tried this, or I'm going to try that, if you're a normal, non-problem drinker, you don't need to regulate and you don't need to address it. That's my experience. And I don't think, people don't get this, but I don't think any emotional trauma itself creates alcoholics. I think there is something just other, there is a predisposition towards it. Not that I think it's genetic either. And it would take too long to explain, but I think it's greatly misunderstood that some people think, oh, well, he became an alcoholic because her husband died or whatever. It's not purely about that, but I think people say what it is. It's a physical allergy, essentially. It's there's a spiritual malady if you want to buy into what spiritual means, and there is an obsession, a mental obsession with the drink. I certainly think I had the physical allergy and the mental obsession, and the spiritual malady, I could guess, would be the things I said to you, that I just wasn't happy with myself. I wasn't happy with my lot, even though I tried to make out that I was. So I would say to anybody who has nagging feelings about being alcoholic, I don't think there's any difference between problem drinker or alcoholic. Nobody would diagnose you in AA. And the only requirement for membership of AA is a desire to stop drinking. So anybody who's worried they're drinking too much and they think they're not in control of it anymore, I would say go to AA and give it a try without fear or prejudice, because you don't have to call yourself, no one's going to call you an alcoholic. And you don't have to call yourself one. Literally, you're there because you have a desire to stop drinking, okay? Not to cut down on drinking, but to stop. And if you want to stop drinking because you think it would be a better life, then I would say go to AA and talk to other people who know about it. That's and I would say if it's occurring to you as an issue, you're normally right. Don't get me wrong, there's probably a small percentage of people who've diagnosed themselves before and thought, I think I might be an alcoholic, and they've turned out to be wrong. Of course, that must have happened. But I would say in about 98% of cases, people who go to AA don't normally go there by accident, if that makes sense. They don't find themselves in those rooms by accident. And I would also say, that it's a great life. It really is, and I know because I drank for so many years and I couldn't imagine. This is what I liken it to, right, Kieran? I went to Vegas in 2014, still drinking with the boys, like I described, Mayweather, Madonna. It was a fun trip. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but I came back kind of damaged, diminished, fraught. Not happy. I felt like I've been through it, like the way people do when they've burnt the candle at both ends. When I went to LA to see Fury Wilder 1. In December 2018, it was twice as good as going to Vegas. It was going to LA sober was twice as good as going to Vegas on the piss. And I do remember, you talk about, did people in the industry notice me? Did they suss me out? Were they onto me? When we were coming back from Vegas on the Sunday morning, after Mayweather had fought Madonna the second time the previous day, we saw Kugan Cassius at the airport. He happened to be at the same airport as I was getting. I don't know if he was getting the same flight out of LA or what. Sorry, out of Las Vegas or what. And I'd already had a couple of pints. I've been drinking since 9 a.m. at the bar, and chatting to people and all this. And when I saw Kugan, I called out excitedly and said, "Hey, Kugan, what's going on, man?" And he looked at me and he went, "Are you drunk?" And I thought, what are you asking me that for, you pious bastard? And I said to him, "Working on it, yeah." But that's one thing I remember, just the fact that I was always, I always seemed to be on it, certainly on a trip like that. Whereas that's what I would say, that this is for other people's benefit. To go to LA and think, what, this is 10 times as good, or at least twice as good. We did more. I felt I was more present. I remember more about the actual fights and all the rest of it. Because I went to Fury Klitschko, and I don't remember that fight at all. And there is a funny story about the whole thing. It was disastrous from start to finish. We lost the tickets. We got on the wrong train. We ended up in Cologne. We had to fly to Stuttgart instead of Dusseldorf, which is 400 miles away. We had to catch the train. I lost the tickets for the fight. We had to buy some more, or we didn't. Muggins, my mate who came with me, had to do it. And do you know what? He's in Alcoholics Anonymous too today. He actually got sober like about a couple of months before I did, because he was in the same boat.
Okay, Ben. It's been really good talking to you, mate. It's been really good. Well, I've sort of watched your story. I follow you on social media, so I've watched I wouldn't say the rise and fall, because I think like a lot of people, I didn't realize you were drinking so much.
No.
I realized
I saw you at the Grove. We've seen each other once, right? At Frotch Groves, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Two. Frotch Groves 2. And I would have been drinking that night. I mean, I wasn't drunk when I saw you, but I remember I was living in that kind of culture of drinking all the time. I'd have had drinks on the way to the thing. I'm sure we could get drinks somehow in the media section. I'm pretty sure we did. And then I was drinking when we finished, all night. I remember that. But I'm glad you didn't know anyway.
But no, it's really good how you sort of reinvented yourself, if you like, and you seem a lot more at peace with yourself now than the old Ben, if that's the way you want to put it.
For sure. I mean, at the end of the day, what it is, right, Kieran, and I would say that to anybody else who's going through whatever they're going through, happiness is an inside job. It really is. You might think, I mean, you do good things, and you're a creative person, and you're a driven person who does creative things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I know you love boxing, and you've done quite well. I know, you've got your reputation. You're out there. Your work. Kieran Gibbons is a thing, but it doesn't really make any difference. Any of us could become as successful or as wealthy as anything. It doesn't make us happy if the other components aren't in place. Happiness honestly is about being comfortable with yourself, being able to sit with yourself and think, I don't mind me. You know what I mean? And today I don't mind me, regardless of what anybody else thinks either way. You know what I mean? So it's an inside job.
Okay, mate, on that positive note, we leave things. Thanks for your time this evening.
No worries.
I really enjoyed this chat, really found it very interesting. If any viewers or listeners are watching it and find it interesting, or think there's anybody else who could benefit by watching it, please pass it on and share it with the relevant people. Follow us on all the social media. Just one thing, Ben, do you want to mention your book?
Yeah, I published 2 books in lockdown, which I'd have never managed when I was still drinking, because I tried doing things like that before and never got to the end of these things. But yeah, they're called Drink, Drugs, Birds and Boxing, volumes 1 and 2. And they chart some of the, hopefully in a readable fashion, they chart my kind of little story, which I've kind of blurted chapters of to Kieran here kind of organically. So if you want to read it in a more kind of ordered form, then that's, go to Amazon, just Google Ben Doughty, Drink, Drugs, Birds and Boxing. And also, when you talk about people who might have a drink problem, anybody who's got an issue who would like to talk to me directly, find me on Facebook and inbox me. I promise that's not an issue. I don't go. If I don't know you from Adam, I don't care. Don't get me wrong. There's some people I stopped answering the phone to because we weren't getting anywhere, and I tried, and I think they weren't ready to get honest. So I do reserve the right to not waste my time talking bollocks to people forever. But anybody who wants to reach out to me, and just do it, and I'll be there.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Hopefully I'll
Cheers,
see you
Kevin.
sometime in the near future. And good luck with everything you got going on, mate. You're listening to Straight to the Point and Cut.